Logan Henderson sat at his desk in the vast examination hall of the Galactic Academy of Advanced Sciences, his fingers drumming lightly against the transparent surface of his holographic console. Around him, students of various alien species worked in silence, their eyes, some glowing, some shifting in color, some entirely mechanical, fixed on their own screens as they navigated through the most difficult mathematics exam in the known universe. The tension in the air was thick, heavier than the artificial gravity holding them all in place. He inhaled deeply, exhaling slowly through his nose. He had spent countless sleepless nights preparing for this exam, knowing that his status as the only human in the academy meant that every result, every mistake, every achievement would reflect not just on himself, but on his entire species. The Galactic Academy did not accept mediocrity. It was a place for the brightest minds across the universe, where intellectual superiority determined one's value more than physical prowess or political status. The professor, a Zelvaxian named Professor Orvok, observed the students from a raised platform at the front of the hall. His elongated form shimmered faintly under the artificial lighting, and the 6 luminescent eyes scattered across his smooth, translucent head moved independently, tracking multiple students at once. He did not need to speak. His mere presence commanded obedience. Logan forced himself to focus on the first problem. The equations floated in mid-air above his console, shifting slightly as he interacted with them. Galactic mathematics was different from anything he had ever encountered on Earth. The symbols moved, adjusted themselves in real time based on complex quantum interactions. Numbers weren't just numbers. They carried energy states, dimensional probabilities, and gravitational constants that fluctuated depending on their relation to the fabric of space-time itself. But he was ready. His hands moved quickly, adjusting variables, rewriting expressions, and reconfiguring unknowns. Unlike the others, who relied on the Academy's standard computational models, Logan had spent weeks analyzing the logic behind these equations, searching for deeper patterns. His mind worked differently from his alien peers. Where they followed rules, he questioned them. Where they sought solutions within existing frameworks, he searched for entirely new perspectives. Time slipped away unnoticed as he worked, the hum of the Academy's energy field fading into the background. One by one, the problems dissolved as he reached their conclusions, but something inside him whispered that his answers were different. He had not just solved the equations, he had rewritten them. His logic led him down paths that had never been explored before, paths that felt more natural, more intuitive. When the final problem appeared, he hesitated for the first time. It was a paradoxical function, a theoretical construct meant to measure a student's ability to work within the accepted laws of galactic physics. The goal was to balance the equation using known universal constants, but Logan saw something else, a flaw, a fundamental inconsistency that no one had ever noticed before. His pulse quickened. Carefully, he adjusted the variables, disregarding the accepted methodology. He removed unnecessary components, redefined constants, and, at last, wrote an entirely new equation, one that resolved the paradox in a way no one had ever attempted. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He had done it. Logan pressed the submit button, feeling a wave of exhaustion and relief wash over him. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, his muscles relaxing for the first time in hours. Around him, other students were still working, their eyes flickering with concentration, their fingers gliding over the holographic interfaces with practiced precision. Some of them would finish early, others would struggle until the last second, but Logan had no doubt that he had given his best effort. Minutes passed. Then, one by one, the results began appearing on the students' screens. Soft murmurs filled the air as numbers materialized in glowing text. High scores, a few perfect marks, some barely passing grades. Logan straightened in his seat as his own result loaded. Then the world went silent. 0%. He blinked. His breath caught in his throat. He read the number again, certain there had been a mistake. But the number did not change. A few students nearby noticed and exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to amusement. A soft chuckle echoed through the hall, then another. Someone muttered something in a language Logan didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. Mockery. His skin burned, not from anger, but from sheer disbelief. How could this be? A zero? Had he made a careless mistake? Had he misunderstood the questions? Professor Orvok's voice, deep and resonant, cut through the whispers. Henderson, remain seated. The room fell completely silent. The professor's 6 eyes locked onto Logan's screen as he floated forward, his long, luminescent fingers moving through the holographic interface. Logan swallowed hard, watching as the professor reviewed his work. Orvok's expression did not change. His species lacked facial muscles. But the slight shift in his posture, the way his fingers momentarily hesitated over the screen, betrayed something unexpected. Confusion. A few more professors arrived, their robes gliding soundlessly across the floor as they examined the data. More whispers, more sideways glances. Logan clenched his fists beneath the desk. He wasn't sure what was worse, the possibility that he had truly failed, or the fact that his failure was now a spectacle. Finally, Orvok straightened. Henderson, he said, his voice perfectly neutral. Your answers do not align with the standard models. They are incorrect. Logan's mouth went dry. Professor, with all due respect, could you show me where I went wrong? Orvok hesitated. It was the smallest pause, barely noticeable, but it was enough for Logan to realize something was off. The professor should have been able to point out his mistakes immediately, yet he was hesitating. The alien's 6 eyes blinked in a slow, deliberate sequence. I will review your exam in further detail. Logan exhaled sharply, forcing himself to nod. But he could feel the eyes of the other students on him, the silent judgment, the amusement in some of their expressions. He had come here to prove that humans were capable of standing alongside the greatest minds in the universe. Instead, he had just made a fool of himself. Or had he? As the professor walked away, Logan caught a glimpse of the screen displaying his results. The equations were still there, exactly as he had written them, but now they were being analyzed by multiple computational models, the data being fed into high-level quantum processors. And then he saw it. An alert flashed across the screen in small, flickering text. The Academy's AI system had flagged his equations as unrecognized mathematical structure, potential anomaly. His heart skipped a beat. Maybe he hadn't failed after all. Logan sat at the edge of his bed in the Academy's dormitory, staring at the holographic display on his wristband. The screen projected the results of his exam, the glaring 0% burning into his vision like a brand. The laughter of his classmates from earlier still echoed in his mind, but what unsettled him more was the reaction of Professor Orvok. The Exelvaxian was known for his precise judgment and absolute confidence in the Academy's mathematical principles. Yet, in the examination hall there had been a moment, however brief, where the professor had hesitated. Logan clenched his jaw and exhaled sharply through his nose. He had reviewed his own work multiple times before submitting it. The logic had been flawless, the equations balanced, the conclusions undeniable. He hadn't just solved the problems, he had refined them, streamlined the calculations into something more elegant. But the system had marked everything as wrong. The notification from the Academy's AI still hovered in his mind. Unrecognized mathematical structure, potential anomaly. He needed answers. Pushing himself off the bed, he grabbed his wristband and activated the navigation function. The device projected a soft blue path leading him out of his dormitory and toward the Academy's research wing. His footsteps echoed in the dimly lit corridors, the polished floors reflecting the neon glow of the embedded guidance strips. Unlike the rest of the Academy, which buzzed with activity during the day, the research sector was eerily silent at night, its halls lined with sealed laboratories and reinforced doors that concealed some of the most advanced experiments in the galaxy. He reached Professor Orvok's office and hesitated. The door's biometric scanner flickered with a faint green glow, indicating the professor was inside. Taking a steadying breath, he pressed his palm against the scanner. The system hummed, scanning his identity before unlocking the door with a soft hiss. Inside, the room was bathed in the deep purple light of Zelvaxian ambient illumination. The walls were lined with floating data panels, equations shifting and recalculating in real time. At the center of the room, Professor Orvok stood in front of a massive holographic display, his 6 eyes shifting between different sections of Logan's exam. The professor did not turn when Logan stepped inside. "You should be in your dormitory, Henderson." Logan squared his shoulders. "I need to understand why my answers were marked wrong." Orvok's fingers twitched slightly as he adjusted the display, zooming in on one of the equations. "Your answers do not align with our models. The grading system is automated. Incorrect structure results in an automatic failure." Logan stepped closer. "But the Academy's AI flagged my work as an anomaly. That means it wasn't just wrong. It was something new." The professor finally turned, his luminous eyes narrowing slightly. "New does not mean correct." Logan held his ground. "It also doesn't mean incorrect." A moment of silence stretched between them, the only sound coming from the soft hum of the processing units recalculating the equations. The professor studied him for several seconds before finally gesturing toward the holographic projection. "Explain your logic," Orvok said. Logan moved beside him, his fingers instinctively reaching for the interface. The system recognized his intent, allowing him to manipulate the data. He pointed to the original Academy-approved solution. "The current method works within a fixed dimensional constant," he began. "But that assumes space-time behaves linearly in all galactic regions. That's not true near singularities, and it's definitely not true in interdimensional rifts. I redefined the constant as a dynamic variable, allowing it to adjust based on gravitational fluctuations." He switched the display to his own solution. "This eliminates computational waste and stabilizes equations that previously required massive energy expenditures just to remain functional." Orvok observed in silence, his eyes flickering between the two solutions. Logan could tell the professor was processing the information at an immense speed. Finally, Orvok spoke. "This model contradicts centuries of established galactic physics." Logan straightened. "No, it expands on them. It doesn't break the rules. It shows that the rules were incomplete." The professor's fingers moved again, running Logan's equations through multiple simulations. The results flickered rapidly, processing faster than Logan's human eyes could follow. Then, abruptly, Orvok deactivated the display. "You will meet me in Laboratory 7 at first light," he said, his tone unreadable. "If your theories hold, you will need more than words to prove them." Logan swallowed, but nodded. He turned toward the door, his heart pounding. He had expected resistance. He had expected dismissal, but he hadn't expected interest. The automated door to Laboratory 7 hissed open as Logan stepped inside. The room was vast, lined with walls of shifting holographic displays and glowing consoles that projected complex mathematical models into the air. At the center stood a massive quantum computational core, its cylindrical structure humming with barely contained energy. The moment he entered, the atmosphere felt heavier, charged with an intensity he had never experienced before. Professor Orvok was already there, his elongated form positioned before an array of interactive holograms. His 6 luminous eyes moved in independent directions, simultaneously reviewing multiple sets of calculations. Without looking up, he gestured for Logan to approach. "Stand here," the professor instructed, pointing to a raised platform near the quantum core. Logan obeyed, his heart pounding as he stepped onto the designated spot. The floor beneath him shifted slightly, scanning his biometrics before stabilizing. Orvok's fingers glided over the controls, and suddenly the entire laboratory transformed. The walls darkened, and holographic projections filled the space around them, shifting into a 3-dimensional representation of Logan's equations. The numbers twisted and rotated, interacting with simulated gravitational fields, energy currents, and dimensional fluctuations. It was a living model of the universe, reacting in real time to the variables Logan had proposed. "Your work has been analyzed by the Academy's primary AI," Orvok said, his voice carrying a weight Logan had never heard before. "It detected inconsistencies. Your equations suggest an alternative framework for interstellar calculations, one that conflicts with the standard laws of galactic physics." Logan tightened his fists. "It doesn't conflict, it enhances. If the model works, we've been making calculations based on incomplete data for centuries." The professor remained silent for a moment before he entered a command into the system. A series of simulations activated, running through established models and comparing them to Logan's. The results fluctuated rapidly, shifting between approval and error, as if the system itself couldn't reconcile the differences. Then, something changed. One of the simulations stabilized. A deep hum resonated through the lab as the quantum core processed the new model. The energy fluctuations aligned perfectly, reducing the computational waste Logan had pointed out. The results weren't just promising, they were impossible by the Academy's current understanding of physics. Orvok's eyes locked onto the data, his fingers twitching slightly. It was the first time Logan had ever seen him display uncertainty. The professor studied the projection for several long moments before finally speaking. "Your model suggests that energy distribution in space-time is not a fixed constant," Orvok stated. "If this is correct, the fundamental principles of interstellar travel, gravitational navigation, and even temporal mechanics must be reconsidered." Logan swallowed hard. He had known his work was different, but he hadn't expected it to shake the very foundation of galactic science. The professor turned to him, his expression unreadable. "The implications of this discovery are dangerous." Logan frowned. "Dangerous?" Orvok deactivated the holograms, plunging the lab back into its dim ambient glow. "If your equations hold, the energy expenditure required for intergalactic travel could be reduced exponentially. That knowledge is not something the ruling factions of the universe will accept lightly." A cold weight settled in Logan's stomach. He hadn't thought about the political consequences of his work. He had been focused on the science, on proving himself, but now, standing in this lab with one of the greatest minds in the galaxy, acknowledging the significance of his discovery, he realized that knowledge, true revolutionary knowledge, was never just about discovery. It was about control. Orvok stepped closer, his towering form casting a faint shadow over Logan. "The Galactic Science Council will convene to review this data. Until then, do not speak of your findings to anyone. You do not yet understand what forces you may have set into motion." Logan nodded slowly, his mind racing. He had come to prove himself. Instead, he had challenged everything. Logan sat alone in his dormitory, staring at the holographic projection of his equations. The numbers glowed softly, shifting in the air as if alive, responding to the silent commands of the Academy's computational system. His mind felt like it was on fire, unable to process everything that had happened in Laboratory 7. The significance of his discovery loomed over him like a storm cloud, and for the first time, he wasn't sure whether he had made a breakthrough or stepped into something far beyond his control. He had wanted validation, recognition. He had sought to prove that humans belonged among the greatest minds in the galaxy, that Earth's potential had been underestimated. Instead, he had uncovered something that could reshape the way the universe functioned, and in doing so, he had made himself a target. The silence of his room felt oppressive. The Academy's artificial night cycle had darkened the corridors outside, leaving only the soft glow of navigation strips along the walls. He should have been exhausted, but his mind refused to rest. The implications of Professor Orvok's words repeated in his thoughts. This knowledge is not something the ruling factions of the universe will accept lightly. A sharp beep interrupted his thoughts. His wristband pulsed with an incoming message. He hesitated before tapping the display. A single line of text appeared. "Meet me in the East Wing. Now." No name, no signature. But Logan recognized the sender code. Orvok. His pulse quickened. He knew better than to ignore the message. Rising from his chair, he grabbed his wristband and slipped quietly out of his room, moving through the dim corridors with careful steps. The east wing of the academy was usually restricted after curfew, reserved for administrative operations and high-security research facilities. If Orvok wanted to meet him there, something was happening. By the time he reached the designated location, the tension in his chest had tightened into something solid. The hallway was empty, the doors sealed, and for a brief moment he wondered if this was a mistake. Then, a panel near the far end of the corridor flickered, and the reinforced door slid open. Orvok stood inside, his 6 glowing eyes scanning the hallway before gesturing for Logan to enter. The door closed behind him with a quiet hiss. The room was smaller than Laboratory 7, with only a single console at the center and a reinforced window overlooking the deep void of space beyond the Academy's protective energy field. The view was breathtaking, but Logan had no time to appreciate it. Orvok turned toward him, his posture rigid. "You have been noticed." Logan's stomach clenched. "By who?" The professor brought up a display. Lines of data scrolled rapidly, filled with encrypted transmissions and flagged alerts. Logan couldn't decipher all of it, but he understood enough. His equations had not just been analyzed by the Academy's AI, external sources had taken interest. "The Council has already begun its review," Orvok said, his voice lower than usual. "But others are watching. Your calculations challenge the foundation of known physics. If validated, they will alter the balance of power across the universe." Logan swallowed. He had considered the scientific ramifications of his discovery, but he hadn't thought about how it would affect power, space travel, energy manipulation, military technology. Everything depended on the established understanding of physics. His equations proved that those calculations had been inefficient, that entire systems could be optimized beyond anything previously imagined. "If the Council sees the truth, they'll adapt," Logan argued. "This is what science is for, to improve our understanding of the universe." Orvok's eyes narrowed. "You assume the Council values truth over control." Logan hesitated. He had spent his entire life believing in the purity of science, in the pursuit of knowledge for the sake of progress. But Orvok was right. Powerful institutions did not always embrace change, especially when it threatened their dominance. "What happens now?" Logan asked. The professor studied him for a long moment before responding. "You will present your findings before the Council in 2 days. It will be a closed hearing, no press, no external observers. If your work is accepted, your place within the scientific elite will be secured. But if it is rejected, your research may never see the light of day." Logan's breath caught. "You mean they could bury it?" Orvok inclined his head slightly. "If they determine that your equations pose a threat to stability, they may suppress them, and if certain factions see your knowledge as dangerous, they may seek to ensure it is never shared by any means necessary." A cold chill ran down Logan's spine. He had thought this was about proving himself, about demonstrating the potential of human intellect, but now he saw the bigger picture. This wasn't just about equations. It was about who controlled the future. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the weight pressing on him. Orvok's gaze did not waver. "You prepare." The professor reached toward the console, inputting a sequence of commands. A hidden compartment in the wall slid open, revealing a compact data drive. He took it and handed it to Logan. "This contains all supporting evidence for your calculations," Orvok said. "You will not rely on the Academy's system. If your work is erased, this will be the only proof it ever existed." Logan took the drive, feeling the weight of it despite its small size. He closed his fingers around it, determination settling in his chest. "Understand this, Henderson," Orvok continued. "You stand at a crossroads. If your findings are accepted, you may change history. If they are denied, you will be forced to choose whether to obey or to fight for the truth." Logan met his gaze. He had come to the Academy to prove himself, Now he realized he was about to decide the fate of knowledge itself. Logan stood before the massive entrance to the Galactic Science Council chamber, his heartbeat a steady drum against his ribs. The walls surrounding him pulsed with faint energy. The architecture an ancient blend of crystalline structures and quantum-imbued alloys, humming with power. This was the seat of the most advanced scientific minds in the galaxy, a place where the fate of discoveries was decided not by merit alone, but by influence, tradition, and the silent pull of those who controlled the flow of knowledge. The door before him slid open without a sound. Inside, a semicircular chamber loomed, vast and illuminated by floating holograms displaying equations, theories, and simulations. The members of the council sat in high-backed seats, their forms a collection of the most influential species in the universe. Logan recognized a few representatives of the Zelvaxians, the Seraphites, the Towering Garon, and even a human delegate from Earth, a man whose name Logan didn't know but whose presence unsettled him. This was not just a scientific panel. This was a battlefield. Professor Orvok stood at the far side of the chamber, his 6 eyes focused solely on Logan as he stepped forward. The moment had arrived. Logan Henderson, human student of the Galactic Academy of Advanced Sciences, one of the council members, a crystalline entity whose voice resonated like chimes, spoke. "You stand before us to justify your findings. Present your case." Logan exhaled and stepped onto the central platform. The moment he did, the quantum processors engaged, displaying his equations in a luminous array above him. His hands tightened into fists at his sides. This was it. "My work demonstrates that the accepted models of interstellar energy distribution are fundamentally flawed," he began, his voice even. "By redefining gravitational variables as dynamic rather than fixed, energy calculations can be optimized, reducing waste and stabilizing travel through high-density gravitational zones. This is not just theoretical. I have provided simulations, tested calculations, and the results are undeniable." The council members remained silent, their gazes unreadable. Logan continued, "These findings mean that all previous models for space travel, wormhole navigation, and energy efficiency have been incomplete. With these equations, ships could travel further with a fraction of the current fuel requirements. Communication systems could stabilize interdimensional relay signals. Entire civilizations could have access to methods that were once restricted to only the most advanced factions." He stopped, letting the weight of his words settle. Then, he added the part that truly mattered. "This isn't just an academic discovery, this changes power. Whoever controls this knowledge controls the future." A murmur spread through the chamber. He had struck where it mattered. One of the council members, a Seraphite whose golden eyes seemed to burn through the air, leaned forward. "You understand what you are suggesting, do you not?" His voice was smooth, controlled. "A shift in power this drastic does not occur without consequence." Logan held his ground. "Then suppressing knowledge is preferable? Denying progress because it threatens the existing order? You speak as if knowledge is an inherent right," another council member, a Garan, said, his deep voice a rolling tremor. "Knowledge is power. Power is never freely given." Logan clenched his jaw. He had known this would be difficult, but he hadn't expected such open resistance. He turned his gaze to the human representative from Earth. The man had remained silent the entire time, but now, as Logan locked eyes with him, he saw something chilling. Indifference. Earth had been his home, yet the man who represented it here had no interest in advocating for human advancement. He was here for stability, for order, for preserving the status quo. And that meant one thing. They had already decided. Logan's chest tightened as he saw the subtle exchange of glances between the council members. The decision wasn't based on his research, it was political. His findings were too disruptive, too unpredictable. They would be buried. The crystalline entity spoke again, its voice tinged with finality. "Your work is impressive, but it is incomplete. Without further verification and long-term controlled trials, we cannot endorse it as an official advancement in our collective knowledge. The Council rules that your research will remain classified until further notice. Logan inhaled sharply. Classified. A bureaucratic way of saying erased. No, he said, his voice louder than he had intended. This isn't about verification. The simulations confirm the results. This is about control. The room darkened slightly as the quantum projections dimmed. A silent warning. You have potential, Henderson, the Seraphite said, his expression unreadable. But you must understand that the universe does not shift for individuals. It shifts when those in power decide it is time. Logan felt a weight settle in his stomach. This was not a battle he could win here. The decision had been made. Orvok, still silent, inclined his head slightly. It was the barest gesture, but Logan understood it. There was another way. The session ended. The moment he stepped off the platform, his equations vanished from the main database. The Council's ruling ensured that his work would be locked behind layers of classified encryption, inaccessible to anyone without the highest level of clearance. It was as if it had never existed. But Logan knew the truth, and truth did not die so easily. He walked out of the chamber, his heart pounding, his fists tight at his sides. He still had the data drive Orvok had given him. He still had the evidence. And now, more than ever, he understood the real battle had just begun. This wasn't about proving himself anymore. This was about fighting for the future of knowledge itself. As he stepped into the corridor, he didn't look back. He had already decided. He would not let them bury the truth.